And I'll send it in the chat. There he goes. Yes, I know. Okay, guys, so we can start. Thank you very much for your presence here. We're very glad to have you there. It's Monday, so double thanks for being available. Siamo pochi ma buoni, as they say it in Italian, no? Just a few, but the good ones. So I'm Audio, in case we've never met, right? When you probably talked with, if you ever talked with us in Instagram or via WhatsApp, you talked actually with Anna, who is doing all the talking. But I'm also teaching here at A Book a Month, and I'll be conducting the class today. Anna, would you like to say anything?
Hey everyone, how are you all doing? Thank you for joining us. Also, just a brief note, we are streaming live this on YouTube, right? So in any case, if you want to re-watch it, or maybe if somebody comes a little bit late, no worries, you're going to be able to watch it from the beginning, okay? If you have any questions, we'll be here. I'll be assisting Audio on chat. I'll try, because I'm using his computer and I have no idea how this keyboard works. So if I write something wrong, just bury me. But I'll be trying to assist you on chat if you need anything, right? While Audio is going to be teaching the class, okay? Good.
Okay, guys, so let me share the screen with you, because today we'll be talking about Ursula Le Guin, right? The short story is entitled The Rule of Names. She's quite an awesome author. I really enjoy a lot her work. Although I have to admit that I know it since a short while, actually. I'm a PhD in literature. So I am a literary critic by profession and an academic, but traditionally, academia was a bit forgetful, let's put it this way, about two very popular genres of fiction, fantasy and science fiction, right? So fantasy and sci-fi is usually looked upon, frowned upon a little bit by literary critics. And it's a pity. It's a pity because there is a lot of, as in any genre, right? There's a lot of bad stuff, but there's a lot of good stuff. And Ursula Le Guin is definitely within this field. So we really have made an effort in A Book a Month to discuss her texts and short stories and novels and everything. Okay, so I'll be talking about the rule of names. Just before we start, a little bit of presentation. Would you like to present us, Anna?
All right, everyone. So I think at this moment, you already know us, but it's never enough to introduce us a little bit and to introduce our work. I am Ana Torquato, right? I am a postdoc in literature, and I work mainly with comparative literature and with literatures in English. I did my master's in English literature in the UK, right? So this is why I have been dedicating so much time to literatures in English. I have founded A Book a Month in 2020 during the beginning of the pandemics, and we have been going on since then. So it's almost 3 years that we have been doing this project, which is something very rewarding. And since last year, because I was doing my postdoc, Audio has joined the project. And it's something that made me really happy, because he is a PhD in literature as well. And he has a very similar way of teaching as I do, and is a person that has very similar values and education qualifications as I do. Audio is also a PhD in literature. He has studied in different countries around the world, in in France, in Italy, and in Greece. And he also hosts the podcast Literatura Viral, which which is going to release, no, has already released, right? The episode about Ursula Le Guin. So if you haven't checked it out, please do after class. And I'm thinking you're going to be very glad to listen to what he has to say about it. Okay, next to you.
Thank you very much, Anna. And so before we start, guys, one initial question is, what exactly is a book a month? Okay, so in case you've never, this is your first time with us, just to make it clear, a book a month has two main objectives. We offer a method to practice and improve language. Okay, so this is definitely one of our bases, using foreign languages, but we do that but while learning about literature. Okay, so we teach literature and we use a foreign language as a tool, as a you know, a in between to reach a second higher, let's put it this way, objective. So we want to learn about literature and we use language as a tool. Okay, sometimes we even forget that we're you know, reading and discussing and teaching in English, and we just go with the flow. Diving deep in this that we'll be offering you today is an open class, so it's a little bit different of what we usually teach, but the idea is for you to have a little bit of a flavor of what we do in class. This would be similar to a class in the short stories course. Okay, so we have two types of courses. In one, we read novels, so a book a month, as the name of the school, but in another course, we read very short texts. Okay, usually up to 10 pages long. So this would be like a long short story in our standards. Okay, so this is a class that we taught already and that we reworked for presentation today. I will allow you, you know, I'll give you an ample space to speak. Please feel free to speak whenever you'd like. Okay, even with questions and everything. Just keep in mind that our class, usually there's more space for speaking. I'll be talking a lot today, but usually it's a bit different interaction in the classroom. Okay, and I would like to start by presenting you guys Ursula Le Guin. Did any of you already, have you read Le Guin already, or do you have intimacy with her work? No? Okay, yeah.
I've never heard of her.
Okay.
Should I unmute every time I would like to speak, or can I?
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, sure.
Okay, and then you mute again, or I do?
Yeah, if you can do it, I think it's better, right? Then
okay, all right. Okay.
I don't want to be impolite here, but I think Christine, did you have you read already Ursula Le Guin? No? Well, okay, guys. So I'm also
just excuse me, sorry to interrupt. Just one question. How many people are on this chat with us?
Good question. I think about,
because I can see only you and Anna and Gu, apart from me. I don't know if there is something wrong with my because I'm not very well acquainted with Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably some configuration in your PC, or because we are in 10 or 12.
Because I really don't know how to handle it well. But at least I can see you, Anna, and another colleague.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so who is Ursula Le Guin? Okay, she actually died. She was a contemporary writer. She actually died just a few years ago, a little bit before the pandemic, and she had a quite long career. You can see that she lived up to 90 years, almost. She died with 89, and that she produced since the 1960s. So she had a very, very long career. And she's very famous for her works within the genre of science fiction, okay? And one of the reasons why she's so famous within this genre is because she's one of the people that worked to produce artistic sci-fi, let's put it this way. Science fiction traditionally was very attached to the subject, to the plot. So new technologies, time travel, alien invasion, you know. So what defines science fiction, it's not so much your style of writing, the way you structure the story. It's more about the theme. So if you're talking about new technologies and about aliens and about things like that, therefore it is science fiction. So it's a very broad and heterogeneous group. One of the things that Ursula Le Guin has really created in the end of the 1960s is a mixture with cultural anthropology. She comes from a family of anthropologists. Her father is a very important, actually, cultural anthropologist in the USA. Her father has trained with Franz Boas. That is one of the biggest names in anthropology ever. And so she's very fluent within the field. She's very read and very learned about anthropology in general and cultural anthropology specifically. And she brings this to her literary production and combines this with science fiction. So she has published in 1969 this novel that is called The Left Hand of Darkness. And it's about a planet in a parallel universe. In this universe, humans have not originated on Earth. We actually originated in another planet, and then we migrated throughout the galaxy, and then we populated Earth. And then the different planets with humans, they've lost touch. And so they were isolated for millions of years, and they evolved differently. So it's a very complex world building. And in this particular planet, the inhabitants have no gender. Okay, so there's no male or female. Everybody has more or less the same sex, and everybody can become pregnant. And this the story is told by a diplomat that reaches this planet for the first time and describes their culture, their religion, their society. And it's really great because it reads as a work of anthropology, of ethnography, but it's about science fiction. And it's amazing because you take away gender out of society and it changes completely. If everybody can get pregnant, the entire society is completely redrawn. So this was a work that, rather than focusing, it's a science fiction novel, but rather than focusing on physics, mathematics, technology, she focuses on the soft sciences. That means sociology, anthropology, the humanities. So every time you have science fiction that leans towards the humanities, you get her Ursula Le Guin's style of doing things. And many people call these social sci-fi. Okay, sometimes they use the term soft sci-fi to talk about this kind of works. Ursula Le Guin hated the term, so she used social sci-fi. That's the one I use as well. It's a fascinating novel. I recommend it to you dearly. Okay, another example of how she combines humanistics with science fiction is this novel here. It's a novella, actually. It's very short. The word for world is forest. Okay, a very nice and interesting story about a planet that it's a forest. Like the entire planet is a forest. It is inhabited by a species of human beings that look more like apes a little bit, but they live in harmony with nature and they have like shamanistic rituals and stuff. So, you know, it's Avatar 50 years beforehand. It's very much in the same style, you know, like all about very hippie in a certain sense, like against the war in Vietnam, pro, you know, like defending ecology, talking already about climate change and things like that. So it is a very avant-garde novel in this sense, and very much engaged with the problems of the day, because we are in the 70s. The 70s, you know, you have a lot of backlash because of the Vietnam War, for example, you know, so she's very much dialoguing with problems that their country and the world was facing back then. At the same time, however, so there you go, you know, it's a completely different type of science fiction that really creates a a whole new path within the field, and this will lead to many great conquests. Okay, and I'm talking about big writers here. Doris Lessing writes a lot of science fiction. Hermann Hesse, Nobel Prize winners, Octavia Butler. So there are many, like really literary authors, the like canonical classics that will start to turn towards science fiction. And I think Ursula Le Guin she's not the only one, of course, but she has a big role in that. Okay. Another thing that she's doing, however, is writing fantasy. That is another genre that is often put aside by literary scholars, unfortunately. And there has been an effort in the past 10 years, or even a little bit more than that, to change this. So to look towards sci-fi and then fantasy to see value in it. And as a literary critic, myself and Anna, we're very much within this school of revaluing the greatness of this tradition. Okay, and actually, exactly at the same time when Ursula Le Guin was writing sci-fi, she was also writing fantasy. She published this novel that is also very influential and epoch-making, sincerely. The novel is called A Wizard of Earthsea. Okay, and then there is a sequel that will be published 1 year after, so in 1970. Okay, the Tombs of Atuan, and there are many others actually. She wrote within this Earthsea cycle. It's how it's called. Really, she wrote like many volumes, and the short story that we read is part of this Earthsea cycle. Okay, so we'll talk about a little bit more about that in a second. One thing that is relevant for us to think here is that Tolkien is amazing, and we love him. And I'm telling you the truth. I do love him. I'm very fond of Tolkien. But the real person responsible for bringing fantasy within academia, more than Tolkien is a big part of it, but even more than him is definitely this cycle here, because once again, it has an amazing story, but it also has amazing cultural, ethical dilemmas, and it's really philosophical at times. And then there's this combination of very artistic writing, and so a very kind of a complex way to present the story. So there are many. Those are values that we often tag upon canonical literature. So we're using this terminology to talk about Machado de Assis, about Balzac, about Tolstoy, and many of these, the same things that we say about them could also be applied to this cycle. Okay, so the reevaluation of fantasy also comes through through this work, and then to via the short story we will discuss today. Another very interesting aspect of Le Guin's work is that she was an activist and a very active feminist as well. So I've just mentioned how one of her novels was confronting the idea of going to Vietnam for war and everything. So she's very engaged with her literary production, and very much so with feminism as well. And one example comes also from this saga, the Earthsea cycle, because right now we are, I suppose, more and more used to seeing diversity in movies, especially like Disney. When I was a kid, there was no diversity in Disney. Everybody was white and European, everybody was blonde and had blue eyes, and that's it, Things have changed, however. Heroes are not always male. Actually, recently, it's much more common to see females as the heroes rather than the male. And we have seen really a lot of different ethnic backgrounds appearing as our leading characters. So in Canto, for example, that is based in Colombia, and has this Latino approach. We have seen many Black characters, both male and female. So just two examples here, but there are many others in soul or in home, right? And also Native Americans and etc. So there is an effort to try to bring diversity in Disney production or Pixar production, you know? And this is something actually that Le Guin is doing since the 70s, because a very important point about this Earth-Sea cycle is that the leading characters are Black. Actually, blackish red. They're not really, she didn't want to use like colors that humans could have. So, but they're not blue like in Avatar, you know, so they're like brownish red in skin. And you don't even know this. She only gives you this information like at the, you know, you've read 70% of the story, and then she mentions, oh, at some instance, one of the guys describing the character, and then you realize that he's Black. So this is very important. This is a book published in 1969, okay? Apartheid was still a thing in South Africa, you know? US is a country with a long history of racism, and if it's bad today, it was much worse in the 60s, I'm sure. So it's very relevant that she's doing this actively, and this is once again part of her activism and active feminism as well. So she's also providing leading roles for women, or the idea of having a genderless society in which everybody is equal, truly equal. It's also something that she's exploring, not in her fantasy, but in her sci-fi, as I've mentioned before. Last thing to say about her before we get into our text is about her influence, okay? It is massive. One example that you can find is Neil Gaiman, okay? This is him. He presented the National Book Award in 2014, and Ursula Le Guin has earned this award, this title, for her entire career, you know, so 4 years before her death. And, you know, Neil Gaiman is extremely famous. I think pretty much everything he wrote became a bestseller of some kind, but bestsellers with huge qualities, right? Like there's a high literary quality in the things he produces. He has worked with Tim Burton, produced comics, produced movies. So he's really into the cultural industry in general, not only producing literature, but many different things. And this is what he had to say about her. She made me a better writer. And I think much more importantly, she made me a much better person who wrote. So this is interesting because he's declaring to learn two things from Ursula Le Guin, right? The craftsmanship of writing, right? So the technique, but also ethics in general. So learning how to be a better person in general. And I think this is, of course, she's praising it, right? She's praising her a lot, but I think this is truthful to her production in general, because there is a lot of there's food for thought, you know. When you're reading, there are so many different scenarios, be it in the fantasy or in the sci-fi, and so many interesting discussion about ethics, and that really give you, you know, it's the kind of book that you wish you have some friends reading at the same time so you can discuss it, you know. So and usually when you feel the urge to discuss something that you're reading, it means that it's complex, you know. It's not like a average soap opera that you would watch in Globo, when you know that the bad guy is bad, the good guy is good, everything is, since the first episode you can already tell how it will end, right? This is not how Ursula Le Guin's works of art work. So that's pretty cool. As Anna mentioned before, I've released an episode of 2 weeks ago in my podcast. You can find it in Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever. It is in Portuguese, okay? But it's about empathy in her fiction. I'm talking about a different short story, but in case you're interested, you can find it later on. Any comments or questions up to this point? Can I go ahead? Okay, that's cool. So let's talk a little bit about world building, because when we're thinking about fantasy in general, and here Tolkien, it's a great example, or Narnia, if you wish, but or Harry Potter, by the way. When you're thinking about fantasy, we are accustomed to the idea that there's magic, right? There are monsters and different types of creatures and stuff like this. Usually we're talking about pre-industrial societies. So usually in fantasy, works of fantasy, you don't have like electricity or like extremely advanced technology. Usually they do very special things and things that are impossible, but they do it by using magic and not by using technology. So this is a key difference between sci-fi and fantasy. Of course, you can break these rules. You don't have to follow them always, but usually narratives do, right? And so this is the first thing. When we read fantasy, we expect magic, okay? But it has to be the right type of magic, When you watch the Game of Thrones, you accept that there are dragons, but if somebody suddenly appears in a tank or flying an airplane, you're gonna be, what? An airplane? Come on, you do not accept an airplane, but you do accept dragons for some reason, right? So and the reason why you do accept one but not the other is precisely because of the rules of world building. So magic is possible, monsters are possible, many creatures from the folklore and myths. But another thing is creating a scenario that is consistent. So this is what we think about when we talk about world building. Think about Tolkien, okay? You read the Lord of the Rings, and you know that there are elves and dragons and whatever, huge eagles and dwarfs and everything. But you also know in the Lord of the Rings, at some point they may mention the Silmarillion or Bilbo or things like that. And then you have to read other works that are connected to the Lord of the Rings and work to build the world, right? So you read the Silmarillion or the Hobbit or the other works by Tolkien in order to grasp this in the entirety of this fictional world. This is something that you can find outside of fantasy as well. Balzac is very good for that, and Machado de Assis as well, because you can read Brás Cubas, and then you can read Quincas Borba, and then you can read Helena, and those three, you see the same characters being reused, and this is exactly the same strategy, world building. I think one of the reasons why literary critics frown upon fantasy is precisely this world building, because there's another thing that uses a lot of world building, and that is video games. Video games love world building. I don't know, any game that you like to play, from GTA to God of War or Final Fantasy, whatever, they all involve world building, and this is something peculiar. This is interesting, that you have this entire world of video games or table games or role play games that intersect and interact with literature. So this is very interesting for us to keep in mind, and this is what we have to consider when we approach this short story, because it is part of this Earth-Sea universe. And the word of Earth-Sea is an archipelago. Okay, so there's a huge sea with many islands. It's a vast archipelago of hundreds of small islands, and there are many places that are still uncharted. Okay, so it's a pre-capitalist world. Okay, so imagine, I don't know, the world in the 13th century. No electricity. There are many parts of the world that do not know about the existence of each other, entire continents that were not discovered yet by the other peoples. Of course, they were discovered by the people that lived in them, right? But and they have iron, but not all societies. Okay, so technology is quite simple. So, and this is something interesting, because until the 13th century, really technology was pretty much the same all around the world, more or less. And this is something that fantasy often recreates, okay? And this is something that Ursula Le Guin is definitely using here in the entire cycle. I think I haven't mentioned that she started writing this in the 1960s, and she continued way through the 2000s, okay? So it is a very long cycle with many different stories intersecting and interacting. And here is a map of how the Earth-Sea archipelago looks like. And you see that you have many different areas. It looks a little bit like Indonesia or the Philippines. And you have different areas, and these, they're not exactly countries, but there are different cultures and different religious organizations. And so it's quite complex, a little bit like Tolkien, okay? You know, they when you read The Lord of the Rings, you know that you have different types of elves and dwarves, and they have history, they have their own language, they have their own literature, and Le Guin is doing exactly the same thing here. But one interesting thing is that, and this is quite different from Tolkien, she presupposes that you already know this world. So when you're reading the novel or the short story, for that effect, you get the impression that you should know this stuff. You know, she's mentioning the islands and she uses the name, and she does not necessarily explain to you, you know, what the name is, where does it come from, who these people are, or she gives very brief explanations. So this is an interesting strategy, because it really do not bother the reader with lengthy explanations on the history of the world building. It really makes it smoother, and this is one of the qualities of her work and of this series. We get to our short story little by little, and I invite you to try to guess if the short story was written before or after The Wizard of the Earth-Sea, the novel that inaugurated this cycle, okay? Because in the novel, in the short story that we're discussing today, we see characters that appeared in the novel. And they talk about the islands, they talk about the different cultures and, you know, the different habits. So we would expect for the short story to be written after the starting, you know, after the start of the cycle with the first volume. But that's not the case, okay? This short story was published in 1964, so 5 years before the volume came. So it's very interesting because we get a glimpse of how this world is, but the entire explanation of how the world works, we'll only get it 5 years afterwards. So I find this very surprising. It's as if, you know, think about Harry Potter, okay? In Harry Potter, there are a lot of, you know, parallel stuff, like the book. Do you remember that book, the Fantastic Beasts and Where They Live, or something like that, or Fantastic Animals and Where They Live? I don't remember the precise title. So this is it's another book that is connected to the world of Harry Potter, but is also separate, you know? And this came after Harry Potter, of course, because, you know, you read the story, you get acquainted with the existence of this book, and then eventually you read the book. It is Ursula Le Guin, however, does the opposite, okay? It is as if J.K. Rowling had published this other volume before and then gave you Harry Potter. Perhaps a little bit like Tolkien, because when we're reading The Lord of the Rings, we think that first he invented the story and then he invented the languages, right? But actually the relationship is the other way around. Tolkien was a linguist and a philologist, and he was so interested in languages that he first created the languages and then created a mythology and all the background and the world in which the languages would be used. So it is also a little bit, the opposite of what one might expect. Any questions or comments? No? Okay. So now you guys tell me, our young Padawans, no? Le Guin is looking like Yoda here, right? What the story about is. If you had to summarize the rule of names, what could we say? Please do not fight and talk all at the same time, okay, guys?
Well, are you hearing me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I read it this afternoon, and I was thinking what was about, and like as you told us, or deep in the meaning, like not only about someone going after a treasure or something of value. There is something very very nice. I liked about this story is the linguistic explore in this story. Like this thing about the names. Like I was when I saw the title of the short story, I was thinking with the rule of name, like what is
What the hell, right?
yeah. I didn't know about Ursula Le Guin, and I was searching a little bit about her, and I saw she was a fantasy and sci-fi writer, and then I saw it, and I was thinking, well, what could be about fantasy or something of sci-fi in it. So I was when I started writing, I was getting it and seeing actually a similarity with Tolkien's work, like in linguistics, and her interest in social linguistics actually.
Yeah.
And, like this is really nice. Like our name is something that we don't put so much interest in it, but like we actually are wrong in it. So it is something that control things, and it is really it is really philosophical. Like it is very deep actually.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Gustavo. And yeah, so linguistics is a big part of this story, right? In the rule of names, we're talking about this Mr. Under the Hill, right? Underhill, and he's a magician, not a very good one, right? And then we are noticing a few odd things about this guy. He's not very efficient. He's kind of not even good enough, right? But is getting by, right? And then there is this sidetrack a little bit about the linguistics, as Gustavo was saying, the rule of names, something we'll discuss in a moment. And this interacts it might look as a side thing, as a parenthesis, but then it turns out to be a very important thing, especially at the end of the story, right? Which is kind of surprising. And this is one thing that I always recommend to our students is when you want to interpret a literary text, I recommend telling to somebody what it is about, perhaps even to yourself, because when you start to explain, like, what is the story about, the writing style, you start to realize many, many things and many different interpretations and many questions that you had not realized that were there, like hidden from view. So this is something I like to do, like you just have to summarize a little bit, to paraphrase what the story was about, and then you start to get many, many ideas, okay? Perhaps, Anna, can you help me to read this passage? Please, Ana Cristina, can I volunteer you? If not, that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Now I unmuted. As I told you, I'm not very well acquainted with this Zoom thing.
Don't worry.
Okay,
don't worry.
should I start?
Please.
Okay. Mr. Underhill came out from under his hill, smiling and breathing hard. Each breath shot out of his nostrils as a double puff of steam, snow white in the morning sunshine. Mr. Underhill looked up at the bright December sky and smiled wider than ever, showing snow white teeth. Then he went down to the village. "Morning, Mr. Underhill," said the villagers as he passed. It was, of course, bad luck to wish anyone a good morning. A simple statement of the time of day was quite enough in a place so permeated with influences as Staten Island, where a careless adjective might change the weather for a week.
Great, thank you so much.
Well,
so this is the start, right? It's like the first paragraph of the short story. And we already get many interesting things here, because especially here in the end, we get this parenthesis, right? And in between, like as a side note, she tells us this, I don't know, it's a little ethnographical, cultural detail, if you will. You should not wish a good morning, because in these islands, the Staten Islands, right? Nobody ever heard about it. If you use an adjective in a careless way, the weather might be affected for a week. So you already have one glimpse, of a hint that there's magic somehow involved in here. Perhaps you didn't know that it was a fantasy short story, but now you're already getting to you have many hints like these in the short story as you proceed reading, right? As you go on. And another interesting thing here is how Mr. Underhill is described, right? It's already a peculiar name for a person, and especially for the construction. Like Le Guin is pointing to us, like, look, this is a weird name, because, Mr. Underhill came out from under his hill. Come on, I mean, she's repeating the name twice. She's like spelling it out for us, like under his hill. Look at this. It is important somehow. If you wrote this when we were like in the 5th grade and we wrote our little text and give it to the teacher, she would say, no, you cannot say this, it's repeating, so change it this sentence. She would make us change. So if
bad style.
Yeah, bad style, right? So if she's doing this, it has a purpose to it. And I invite you to get this feeling of a double puff of steam. So it's a weird, peculiar character. Like he's breathing and you can see like smoke going out. When she smiles, she look at the sky and smiles like wider than ever. Okay, and his teeth are snow white. We'll learn later on that he's like he's a mid-age, he's like 50 something. He's a little bit overweight. He's very shy. His feet are a bit crooked, so he walks with difficulty. So he does not seem to be in his top shape and his top looks. However, his teeth are very white and beautiful. Okay, this is relevant. This is very relevant for what we'll learn later on in the story. But at this point, you don't know a thing. You don't know that dragons will appear some way, and you don't know what will happen. So she's bearing the information there, and you could only realize that it's here in a second reading. Okay, perhaps I'm spoiling it to you by mentioning this straight away. Please forgive me, but this is something that we find in good literature all over again.
Especially in short stories, because they are so short, every word has a heavy weight.
Yes.
I don't know if I can put it in that way.
Yeah. Great comment, Anna. Every word counts, right? And when you're writing something short, you have to be concise. You have no you have to spare, right? You have to
like a poem.
Yeah, exactly.
Every word has great value.
Exactly. Yeah. And there are many great classics of literature that work in precisely this way. The signals are all there, but you cannot realize in a first reading because you don't know what will happen later on. So sometimes I had a professor at university that used to say that we should not read, we should reread. And his point was precisely this one, that when you read good literature, when you read it for the first time, the Divine Comedy, for example, or Shakespeare, or, you know, like very complex classics, when you read for the first time, you get the part of the picture. But when you read for the second, the third, the fourth time, sometimes you start to see and you're like, oh my God, it was under my eyes and I didn't see it. And of course you could not, because you didn't know. This, you want an example? Grande Sertão Veredas, okay? You read it once with a lot of difficulty, especially in the beginning, you're like, what the hell is happening here? And when you reach the end, you're like, oh my God. And then you have to flip back the book and start it all over again. And then it makes so much sense, right? So this circularity of literature is something that we see in a variety of great many authors, from Dostoevsky to Homer. And Le Guin is part of this as well. This short story is definitely part of this. Can I go on?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Right here, what I wanted to ask you is, did you notice anything suspicious? Because I think Le Guin expects us to notice suspicious things here. Why would he be smiling like wider than ever if he didn't have a reason? And it's interesting because this is not a detective story, for example. It's not a, you know, like Sherlock Holmes story or Agatha Christie, but it could be, because a story by Agatha Christie would start in a very similar way. So once again, see, she's misleading us to expect one thing, and then she'll surprise us going in a different direction, okay? And one reason why we should be suspicious is because the kids are suspicious. So we see the children in the story, and they're saying this: he makes me nervous. He smiles so much, they all said, pouting, twisting silky ringlets around the finger. Nervous was a newfangled word, and their mothers all replied grimly, nervous, my foot. Silliness is the word for it. Mr. Underhill is a very respectable wizard. Okay, so the kids are suspicious. And because of that, they get a sermon from their mothers, because how dare you to be suspicious of Mr. Underhill, a very respectable wizard. Okay, newfangled means something that is new, that you've never seen before, something that is different from what we are used to. Okay, and so let's keep it here, okay? This suspiciousness. Let's drop it here, and then we'll, you know, when you watch Ana Maria Braga and she prepares the sauce, and then she says, put it aside, and then we'll come back to it. So let's do the same thing here. We put it aside, and then once we cook the pasta, we come back to this point. My question for you guys, can anybody help me explaining what is the rule of names?
Basically, when you know the name of a person, of something, you acquire the power over it. So that's why that's the rule of the village, to not know the name of people and to give their names based on their characteristics. So that's why Under the Hill lives under a hill, and the black beard has a black beard. So
yeah. Very self-explanatory, right?
yeah.
And this is a very interesting thing. You can never reveal your true name, and they only get their real name once they reach puberty. Okay, so when they become like, there is a ritual of passage, and then they receive their names, and their names are imbued with power, and they reveal your identity. So it's not that they have to keep it a secret from everybody, because your family and the friends that you trust, they know your name. Okay, but this means that they have power over you. Okay, and so this is a very interesting thing. We don't see this in the story. Okay, guys, I'm giving you this information for if you want to read the Earth Sea cycle, you will find it there. But it's a very important thing, an act of trust and of building a bond with someone when you reveal your name. Okay, so I don't know, it's like having sex in a certain sense or something like that. You know, it's something very deep, profound, intimate, and potentially dangerous. Okay, so but they do reveal their names from time to time in the right situations. And the way we learn this in the story is pretty nice. Mr. Underhill is walking in the market, and this is an illiterate society. Also very interesting point, that there is no real school. Like the kids, sometimes they are in a barn, sometimes they are in the open air. So it's a little bit like the Greek philosophers, you know, like that would be in the market, or, you know, Aristotle was famous for teaching while he walked. So he would be walking with friends, and then just discussing philosophy. Okay. My mom loves to walk in the beach, you know, very early on in the morning. Perhaps I could once try to teach a course while we walk in the beach. Why not? It would be an interesting thing. And so this is what they're doing, and they learn everything by discussing. They do not really read, and this is very nice, because when we think about anthropology, this is the way in which many illiterate societies work, precisely the same way as we see here. And she makes no big fuss about it. And actually, we have to remember that writing exists for the past 5,000 years, but humans have existed for at least 250,000. So for 98% of the history of Homo sapiens, this is exactly how we communicated and how we taught new generations. Was nobody could read before 5,000 years ago, right? In prehistory, nobody read. There was no such a thing as reading, but still there was literature. It was oral. There was teaching, but it was not written down. It was just as we see it here. So Mr. Underhill is walking. The beautiful teacher is teaching, and then the children know that they cannot say their names, and they can never ask the names, but they do not really know why. And so Mr. Underhill explains. Can I volunteer someone? Daniele, could you help me with that, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
The children were silent. The sheep bleated gently. Mr. Underhill answered the question, because the name is the thing, he said in his shy, soft, husky voice. And the true name is the true thing. To speak the name is to control the thing. Am I right, schoolmistress?
Yeah, so we see here, thank you very much, Danielle. He's playing around, right? He intrudes, he teaches them, and he's a respectable figure, right? So his intrusion is important, and then he makes a little play, right? Like, am I right? You know, like to confirm that with the mistress and to recognize her authority. Okay, and I love this thing. The name is the thing. This is a literal translation from something that we see in Latin a lot. Okay, this was extremely important for the Romans. In Latin, this is the amazing expression. I love it. Nomen est omen. Okay, the name is the thing. The name is the, how do you say that? The augur, you know, o augúrio in Portuguese. So what they mean is that the Romans had this belief that if your name was, I don't know, Bella, it means that you're beautiful. If your name is winner, therefore you're going to win. If your name is loser, you're going to lose. Things like that, okay? So this is the name is the thing. The name holds the power, magic power, and it holds identity, and it influences how things happen. And not only the Romans did that, actually. We also do this. We do it perhaps not so much with names, but we do it with numbers, for example. Friday 13th, or, you know, stuff like this. Many people do not care, but some do, right? And even those that do not care, for example, I don't think of myself as a superstitious person, but still, if I have to drive, let's say I'm going to São Paulo, and then I have to drive on the road, and then my mom tells me, Audio, be careful. Yesterday there was an accident and 20 people were killed. I'm like, come on, Mom. Give me a break, come on. And then I'm probably doing this in wood, right? And therefore, it's superstition. Because by the fact that she told me that there was an accident, I imply that somehow it is more likely, it is more probable that I'll be in an accident. This is why it's a little bit of a taboo about talking about accidents, or sometimes using the names of diseases, you know, when you have to go to pick up an exam and you're thinking, oh my God, maybe I have this or that. Sometimes you would not use the name precisely because of this, because the name is the thing. We have this idea that there is magic to it. And the Romans were not the only ones to do this, okay? The Egyptians did it as well a lot. The Greeks did it as well a lot. We do it a lot. And we see this a lot in art. One example is Wagner, okay? If you think about Lohengrin, it's a legend, it's a medieval legend that Wagner adopts and uses as the basis of his opera, right? And the key element in Lohengrin is that he will marry this woman and save her, but she can never ask him what is his true name. Exactly what we see in this story. Or in the golem, you know, the golem is a traditional myth, or it's part of the Jewish folklore. And there is this famous movie by the early German cinema. And how do you create a golem? By writing the name of God in a piece of paper, the secret name of God, and then you put it in the golem, and then it's animated. So once again, is the power in the true name. And this, we could even stretch it a little bit to think about 1984. You know, there is, and if you have read it, there is the newspeak, right? There is this new language that they have to use, and there are many words that they cannot use because using certain words will make you think in certain ways, and this is dangerous, right? So this idea of having power in names is something very alluring, and we see in many cultures. It's very common, for example, in different nations in South America, for example, indigenous populations. Okay, quite common as well. Anyway, the names have a lot of power. Suddenly, a traveler arrives, Blackbeard. He has a lot of allure, right? He's beautiful, he's handsome. The women are interested immediately. He seems rich. He seems to be a powerful wizard. And he decides to face Mr. Underhill. For some reason, he wants to meet him. And he's very, he's inquiring, like, indirectly about Mr. Underhill. But he does not, and you see that what he's really looking for is for the information about him. But he does it in a way like James Bond does in his movies, for example, like very cautiously and indirectly, in an indirect way. But finally, we realize that he will reveal himself to one of the fishers, and he reveals that Mr. Underhill has stolen a treasure that belongs to him and his family, and he is there to fight Mr. Underhill. And he's very confident because he knows his true name, right? So can someone help me with the reading? Maria, can I ask you? Is that okay?
Take and shape you please, little Mr. Underhill, he taunted. I can match you, but the game grows tiresome. I want to look upon my treasure, upon Enoch. Now, big dragon, little wizard, take your true shape. I command you by the power of your true name, Evil.
That's great. Thank you so much. So here you see he's like provoking and defying Mr. Underhill, right? And he does not seem as a very promising opponent, right? Taunted means exactly this, is when you provoke someone in an insulting way. This is to taunt, okay? So he's like making fun, take any shape you please, because he's assuming when Mr. Underhill turns into a dragon, he's assuming that's just fake, right? So it's just illusion. And it's like, yeah, whatever, you're a dragon, give me my treasure. Big dragon, little wizard. I commend you by the power of your true name, Yevald, right? So he uses the name. Do you guys remember what happens next? Does anyone want to describe to me what happens in the next scene? Something unexpected takes place. And it is that Mr. Underhill is actually a dragon. It's not fake, and he's not waiting for that. He's not expecting that at all. So when he says Yevald, he expects the dragon like to become this tiny magician or to see some other form. And it turns out that he will have to face a dragon. Okay, so just jump a little bit here. And it's super cool because one of the things that we see Ursula Le Guin manipulating is that she's not very fond of violence. So she's actually talking a lot about this and the responsibility of sci-fi and fantasy in depicting or choosing not to depict, not to portray violence. So one thing that happens here is that the battle itself is totally out of the frame. You know, she uses a technique because they are provoking. We're getting like they're getting to the fight. They're getting ready. They will fight for the belt, right? For the MMA belt. And suddenly she changes the focus to the fisher. Bird could not move at all, not even blink. He cowered, staring whether he would or not. He saw the black dragon hang there in the air above Blackbeard. He saw the fire lick like many tongues from the scaly mouth, the steam jet from the red nostrils. He saw Blackbeard's face grow white as chalk, and the beard-fringed lips trembling. Your name is Yevald. So you see, Ursula Le Guin does not tell us he was not expecting a dragon, he expecting something different. No, she shows us his reaction. He starts to look pale and starts to tremble, like, your name is Evil. He repeats once again, not so confident anymore, right? So we see she's not giving us the result. She's not giving us the fish. She's telling us how to fish. You know, she's teaching us how to get the fish for ourselves. So she's expecting a more active reader. Yes, said a great husky hissing voice. My true name is Yevald, and my true shape is this shape. But the dragon was killed. They found dragon bones on Udrath Island. That was another dragon, said the dragon, and then stooped like a hawk, talons outstretched, and Bert shut his eyes. So, you know, the talons are the claws of you know, an eagle or urubu or something, you know, they have talons. So the dragon, like, after spitting fire, he's flying this way. And rather than describing how Blackbeard is killed and everything, what Ursula Le Guin gives to us is, and Bert shut his eyes. You know, he closes his eyes. So the violence is happening outside of the short story. And this is relevant for us to notice, you know, especially imagine Hollywood turning this into a movie. They would have a big problem with this. Okay, and probably they would change the story as they always do, right? One fast comment, because I'm already speaking too much. Fast comment here. We all have seen dragons, and this dragon is taking care of a treasure, right? And this is something interesting about fantasy that is using a lot of myths and folklore. This one is Smaug, if you haven't recognized him from The Hobbit, right? This drawing was made by Tolkien himself, right? So this idea of working with folklore and myths and fairy tales is something that is very, very old, at least since the 19th century. It is done in fantasy. Tolkien and Le Guin are no exception. Another interesting thing for us to notice here is that there is a lot of influence from epic poetry, right? And for example, Beowulf, the epic poem of the Anglo-Saxon tradition. It's a poem from the 9th century, perhaps the 10th. And Beowulf kills a dragon. And by the way, the dragon is his son. It's his fault that the dragon appeared in the first place. So it's a very interesting type of hero, right? Because he's saving the day, but actually he's just cleaning the mess that he himself created. Anyway, yes, Anna, please go ahead.
You know what reminded me? Actually, when I first taught this class, it didn't come to my mind this possible similarity, but there is this fairy tale that was recollected by the Brothers Grimm, which is called, I wrote on chat if you want to check it. It's like Rumpelstiltskin. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but I think it appears on Shrek. So if you remember watching Shrek, you're gonna see it. But the idea is that this like gnome-like kind of figure is able to spin straw, like palha straw, into gold, and he helps like a miller's daughter in order to become richer, and then she gets married to the prince or the king or something like that. And then he is only able to teach her in exchange for her firstborn child. So when he's going to claim his prize in the end, after she has already married with the king or the prince, whatever, and he's going to claim his the child, then the only way that she is able to get out of the curse is by finding out his name. So it's like the two things, like the idea of the name, that she has able to cancel his power over her, because once she knows his name, she's able to have control over him. And also the fact, the connection with a straw and gold, the idea of the treasure, right? So I think it's very similar. So in some ways, I think that also Ursula Le Guin is drawing from this tradition of oral fairy tales that have been like existing in European oral lit, as Audie was saying, for a long, long time, but still she's trying to reshape it in various ways in order to accommodate this new type of sci-fi. So I find it really, really interesting.
Yeah, and it's great because, you know, the Brothers Grimm are extremely respected by literary critics, right? So it shows how it's paradoxical for the genre not to be respected. And I've placed here this example. The Kalevala is the epic poem of Finland. Okay, so it was written in the end of the 19th century by using folklore and oral literature. A guy called Lönnrot has compiled this poem, combining several different poems, and is like is Os Lusíadas from Finland. And you have very much the same approach here. And one interesting, I'm a literature professor, so I have to say this. One interesting thing about this epic poem, those epic poems actually, is that they're not really the way we think about poetry. We think always about rhymes and metrics. Those are written in a different kind of poetry that is called alliterative poetry. And this means that rather than using rhyming, as we do, they use the repetition of consonants. And the effect is amazing. I remember there's one verse in Beowulf that is like, in the darkness dwelt a demon sprite, whose heart was filled with fury and hate. So you can see, in the darkness dwelt a demon sprite, whose heart was filled with fury and hate. Filled fury, hate, whose heart hate. So you have all these repetitions of consonants that really makes it look like, it sounds astounding, it sounds amazing. but at the same time, it sounds a little bit like rap in a certain sense, you know, or repente or something. So you really see how literature, although we like to think about literature as a very high learned thing, and it is, but there's also this other side of literature, of the oral literature, the craftsmanship, the creativeness of making a joke very fast, you know. So we value a lot this very broad definition of what literature is and how we should approach it. Okay, just a side comment. Let's go, because our time is flowing. Yeah, so the violence takes place outside of the story, and this is super interesting. And then something happens. Bert is desperate, and he runs, gets Palani, the beautiful teacher, and brings her out of the sea, of the island, right? Does anyone remember why he does this?
Because when Bert is talking with Blackbeard, they say the favorite meal of dragons is maidens, and Bert, when he sees Mr. Underhill turning into a dragon, he realizes his love is a maiden, so
Yeah,
he needs to run with her.
yeah, great. Thank you so much, Gustavo. Exactly. Yeah, and probably we also should read something in between the lines there, that perhaps is just performing a duty, because if you can save an innocent woman, why not? But perhaps there's also something else in between there, right? I would not be surprised if we could read another short story about how he's in love with the school mistress or something like that. So this is it's a nice thing about world building, that you know, they put the seeds of these situations there, and then we get our imagination working, right? So yeah, that's exactly why he flies away. And it's also interesting how the story ends, because rather than focusing on the clash between the wizards and the dragon and stuff, the narrator shifts his attention, or her attention, to the people, to the village, and how they're talking. Okay, and they're talking about how Bert fled with the schoolmistress, and also how Blackbeard disappeared, leaving his things behind. So they're only talking about this. There's a lot of gossip going on, and they for 3 days they only talked about that, but eventually they did stop talking about it 3 days later. They had other things to talk about when Mr. Underhill finally came out of his cave. Mr. Underhill had decided that since his true name was no longer a secret, he might as well drop his disguise. Walking was a lot harder than flying, and besides, it was a long, long time since he had had a real meal. Okay, this last sentence is what we often call free indirect speech. You know, like this is not the narrator. You see, in the last sentence, we can almost imagine the voice of the dragons saying, like, you know what? Everybody knows my name, so walking is a lot harder than flying, so I'll go flying, and it has been a long time since I have had a meal. You know, so rather than putting this sentence in his mouth, well, in the dragon's mouth, what the narrator does here is we read the sentence in the voice of the narrator, but in a certain sense, we're reading the dragon's thoughts, right? We're getting this gray zone between the narrator and the character. And then the short story has ended. And we realized that back there, when we read the first paragraph, we realize why he's laughing when he's looking to the sky, because he wants to go flying. He's a freaking dragon in disguise. We understand why he has crooked feet and he moves in an awkward way, because he's not a freaking human. He's a freaking dragon. This is why he has a double puff of steam coming out of his nose. And this is why he has this lizard-like, this crocodile-like, like very snow white teeth and a wide open mouth. So even in his human form, there are a few hints of his dragon nature, right? And Le Guin puts it there just for us to appreciate in the beginning of the story, but she knows very well that we are not able to. Finally, the very last thing that I think is relevant about this story is this question that I will leave it for you, okay, to think about this after class. Is there a hero in this story? Okay, because not only violence is not appearing here, but Le Guin is not following the traditional way in which fairy tales are told. There is a conflict, but you know, it's not very clear who is right or who is wrong. Like, the dragon is not killing because he's evil. He's like defending himself. But so it's very different from the dragon that we see in The Hobbit, for example. When you watch the movie, for example, the dragon is clearly the aggressor and the bad guy. And here, yes, he devours maidens, yes, but we do not really see this in the story so much. That we talk about it, but he's not killing anyone. And we do not really get the idea that he's evil. If someone is the aggressor, is more like Blackbeard, perhaps. So it's interesting because Le Guin is playing us around with our expectations about having villains and having heroes. And this, the stories of Earthsea have been adapted to cinema twice. And in both cases, one of them was an adaptation by the Ghibli studio, you know, in Japan, Miyazaki and everything. So it's a lovely adaptation, very beautiful. But Le Guin complained also about this one. And one of her complaints is precisely this. She was saying it's too violent, and there is, you know, there are clear villains and heroes, and I didn't want to use such a simplistic representation of human action. Human action is very complex and very broad, and very rarely in the real world you have people that are only heroes and only good, and then people that are only evil and only bad. You know, Superman and Lex Luthor are too simple for reality, and Le Guin wanted to create this complexity in her work. Okay, so we still have a few minutes, but this is more or less the kind of things that we're doing here in the Book a Month. Do you guys have any other comments or questions before I move on? No? So
I do.
Yes,
sorry.
yes, I know.
So for me, it sounds as if Bert was the hero because he saved the maiden from being devoured by the dragon. And it seems to me that you don't quite agree with that. Because
I have a good point, yeah. But I also think that usually we expect the hero to be doing the fighting as well, right? So I agree, I accept there is some heroic charge there, but in a certain sense, it's
not
different.
A real hero.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not what we would be expect. Imagine if you're watching Spider-Man, right? And then when the dragon appears, the heroic thing that Spider-Man does is get the girl and flee.
Right, yeah,
would
that's
not
right.
really accept us feeling his role, right, as a superhero.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So it is heroic for sure what he does, but it is already a manipulation and a change, a creative way of using this, right?
He's not the hero in the short story.
Yeah, Le Guin is playing around with what we expect a hero to do, right? So,
okay.
But you have a very good point.
You.
Thank you. Yes,
Thank you.
Who wanted to say something, Christine?
Yeah, so I don't think he's a hero because considering the rest of the village became a meal, right? So he saves the girl, but the rest of the entire village is dead. So he didn't did much of a saving of the rest of the people.
You have a good point. You have a good point, because he should have warned the others. He does not tell anyone, right? He just
split away.
Yeah. That I had not thought about this, but you're right. So you see, this is exactly what I mean when I mean about Le Guin changing our expectations and working that with it. Because now we have a very interesting discussion here. Is he the hero or not? Yes, in a certain sense he is, as Anna said. He saved the girl, etc., etc. But then on the other hand, as Christine said, he did not warn anyone. So what the heck? Now everybody's gonna die. So yeah, this is the great thing. We get complexity.
That's what I like about short stories, because there are so many layers.
Yeah.
In a short story.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to give you guys a flavor of how our classes are, and this is the kind of things that we would be doing on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis. It depends on the type of courses that we offer here. So just I'll go through a brief presentation of the school. Do you want to say anything, Anna?
No, you said that you wanted to give us a flavor of it, and then I was just saying that it tasted great. So thank you very much for the class.
Thank you so much. It's our pleasure, Anna. Okay, so a very brief presentation here, guys. What we'll be reading in March, and we promise that we'll take 1 hour and a half, so I'll try to be in with the time. We offer two types of courses, and they depend on how much time you have to read. So if you have more time, you may wish to read a book a month, right? So one novel every month. And then we have 2 levels. There's the advanced level, in which you read about 50 pages a week, or the intermediate level, in which you read about 30 pages a week. So it is a considerable amount, but not extraordinary either, in the sense that 50 pages, what would that be? 3 hours of reading every week. It is a considerable amount, but we can manage, right? If you do not have a lot of time, however, you can go for the short stories course, because we read texts up to 10 pages. So usually it's less than half an hour of reading every week. Okay, so this is one thing to keep in mind. In the short stories course, we'll be reading Herman Melville next, Bertolt Bartleby, the Scrivener, a great classic, right? It is slightly longer, so this is why we'll break it in 2 classes. So 1 week we read the first part, and then read the second part, and then in the second part of the month we'll be reading Eileen Chang. She's a Chinese author. Okay. She translated her own works into Chinese. She has fled the revolution in China and moved into the US. And she wrote this very interesting story, Lust Caution, about secret agents in China. It's pretty cool. I know of a literary critic that I trust a lot, and he's a specialist in Chinese fiction. And he says that in his opinion, she's the best Chinese writer of the 20th century. Okay, so it's his opinion. I don't have the expertise to say such a thing, but I trust him. And this is one of the things that we do here in A Book a Month. We do mostly literatures in English. Okay, so this is different from English literature. Okay, we love English literature. We love literature from the US, but we also try to discuss things from Nigeria that were written in English, things from India, things from Australia, from New Zealand. So we really think very broadly. And from now and then, every now and then, there is a 15% that we allow ourselves to pick up in translation. So, you know, if you're going to read this in Portuguese, it's going to be a translation anyway. So why not do that in English as well? We take a lot of care with that, but because we love global literature, so we really want to think about not only Europe, we love their tradition, but the entire world, and we make a big effort to try to discuss texts from Asia, from Africa, etc. So this is the kind of writers that we'll be discussing the short stories course: Lovecraft, Virginia Woolf, Thomas Mann, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, Alice Walker, very many important people, Nobel Prize winners, classics of literature, classics of horror in the case of Lovecraft. Yes, Anna, go ahead.
And just to mention that Agatha Christie, we start tomorrow, right? So from tomorrow on until like the end of next week, we talk about 2 of her short stories. I published it on Instagram: The Adventure of the Egyptian Tomb and The Mystery of Hunter's Lodge. So if you're interested in reading Agatha Christie, we start with her this month, and then we go to Eileen Chang, if I'm not mistaken, and then to Herman Melville.
That's great. And then in the other type of courses, in the novels, we'll be reading In the novels advanced, Jack Kerouac, very big influence in American literature, right? The author of On the Road, a great classic. We'll be reading, however, The Dharma Bums. That is like a sequel to On the Road. Very nice, about two friends hitchhiking together, and they go mountain climbing, they do trekking. It's pretty cool. They discuss Buddhism. Is a very nice story. And we'll also be reading these other texts. So we'll be reading Ursula Le Guin, by the way, The Left Hand of Darkness in May. But before that, we'll be reading Pearl S. Buck. She is not widely known, and I have no idea why, because she won a Nobel Prize and the Pulitzer Prize. So the two most prestigious prizes in literature. She won them both. And we'll be reading one of her first books, East Wind, West Wind. And finally, Salman Rushdie, a great contemporary writer, still alive, from India, living he became a British citizen. Haroun and the Sea of Stories. That is a dialogue with the 1001 Nights. You know, so very nice, very funny book. I love it. And all of them are connected by the theme of traveling. We like to organize our readings by theme, more or less, so we get many different perspectives. And finally, in the novels intermediate, we'll be talking about Hermann Hesse, the next reading, Siddhartha. Hesse does not require a presentation, right? He won the Nobel Prize. He won so many great novels, great influence in literature in general. This group is dedicated to talk about happiness. Okay, so we talk about the happy days or the lack of it, because after Siddhartha, we'll be reading Albert Camus, The Stranger, very philosophical and profound novel, a classic of British literature, The Secret Garden. So many movies, everybody loves it. And my favorite, John Steinbeck, Cannery Row. Okay, Steinbeck usually is quite difficult to read, but this one is quite easy and super funny as well. So this is why we chose it. Yes, Anna.
I just wanted to remind you that today would be John Steinbeck's birthday. I don't know how old would he be, but it's an important day. I published some video about that, and later on today, people are going to publish something concerning Siddhartha. If you wanna, and also about Hermann Hesse, like a little short video, talking a little bit about Hermann Hesse, because I think that although he's a very well-known writer across the globe, I think that at this point in the 21st century, not many people read Hesse anymore. Maybe he got like a boon in the 1960s and 1980s, but not much nowadays. So we want to revive a little bit this thrill about the author. So we're very excited to talk about Siddhartha as well. And we begin classes next week on Siddhartha.
And finally, guys, so it's about happiness. This is just to let you know, some of our courses, like the short stories or one of the classes of the novels intermediate, they happen on a weekly basis. So either every Tuesday or every Wednesday. But other courses, they are bi-weekly. Okay, so they only happen twice a month. The classes are a bit longer, but we meet less frequently. And it's a matter of style. Some people prefer one, the others prefer the other, but the amount of content that we cover is pretty much the same. And we have all these classes on Saturday and Thursday, whatever it pleases you. And you can find all of this info in Instagram, as well as the prices. There's different prices based on if it's on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis. Okay. And I think that's all, guys. We promised you 1 hour and a half of classes, and we started 5 minutes late. So I'm finishing 1 minute beforehand. Thank you very much for your attention and for your presence. It's really delightful to have you here. And if you have any comments or questions, we're here, okay?
I don't have any questions, just I would like to thank you both for the lovely opportunity of being with you and learning so much about literature.
Thank you, Anna. Our pleasure. Okay, guys, so that's it. Thank you so much. Then if you want to rewatch it or recommend it to someone, it will be in our YouTube channel. So you just have to search there, A Book a Month, you'll find it. And that's it. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the class and the short story, and see you around. Okay, take good care.